The steady beep of the heart monitor was the first sound I registered as consciousness returned. My eyelids felt impossibly heavy, and the sterile scent of disinfectant filled my nostrils. I tried to move my fingers and felt a warm hand immediately. Squeeze mine. "Sarah? Sarah, can you hear me? She's waking up," Diane's familiar voice called out, followed by a flurry of activity around my hospital bed. I managed to open my eyes to the blinding fluorescent lights of Grand Rapids Memorial's ICU. The concerned faces of Diane and Dr. Chen swam into focus above me. My throat felt like sandpaper as I tried to form words. "What happened?" I croaked. "You were in an accident, Sarah. Your car went off Cedar Point Road in the storm," Dr. Chen explained gently. "You've been unconscious for almost 3 weeks." 3 weeks. The words didn't make sense. The last thing I remembered was driving home from Dad's funeral in the pouring rain. Windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the downpour. My vision blurred with tears. Dad. The funeral. The will reading scheduled for the following week. My sister Jessica's tense face when the family attorney had mentioned Dad's specific instructions. "The family," I managed to whisper. Diane's expression shifted subtly, a tightening around her eyes that I recognized from 20 years of friendship. Something was wrong. "Let's focus on you getting better first," she deflected, exchanging a look with Dr. Chen. It took another week of recovery before Diane finally told me what I had missed during those lost weeks. My father's estate, the family business, Mitchell Hardware and Supply, the lakefront property that had been in our family for 3 generations, and his substantial investment portfolio, had been distributed according to his will. Jessica, my older sister, had taken control of everything. "She claimed it was what your father wanted," Diane explained, unable to meet my eyes. "Without you there to contest anything." Robert Williams seemed uncomfortable, but Jessica had documentation showing your father had changed his mind before he died. I stared out the hospital window at the autumn leaves falling from the maple trees lining the parking lot. My father would never have cut me out of my inheritance. Something wasn't right. "Get Tom on the phone," I told Diane, "and find out where Robert Williams is keeping the original documents." What Jessica didn't know, what no one knew except my father, and Tom Carson, was that 18 months ago, Dad had created a special trust, one that would only come to light under specific circumstances. He had anticipated everything, including the possibility that Jessica might try to take control. As I lay in that hospital bed, muscles still weak from weeks of disuse, I began to plan how I would reclaim what was rightfully mine. Jessica had always underestimated me, seeing only the younger sister who had stepped back from her legal career to help Dad with the family business. She had no idea that I had been the one to structure the business holdings that had tripled our family's wealth in the last decade. She would soon discover that taking advantage of my hospitalization was the most expensive mistake she'd ever made. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Mitchell family home stood on the shores of Lake Michigan, a sprawling cedar and stone structure that our great-grandfather had built with lumber from his own mill. As a child, I had run through its hallways, hidden in its many nooks, and fallen asleep to the sound of waves lapping against the private dock. Now, as my friend's car pulled into the circular driveway 6 weeks after my accident, the house felt like a fortress I needed to reclaim. Jessica's luxury SUV sat in the spot where Dad's vintage truck had always been parked. The sight of it sent a wave of anger through me that I carefully tucked away. Emotion would not serve me today, only strategy would. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Diane asked, concern etched on her face as she helped me gather my things. My body was still healing, movement painful and deliberate, but the doctors had finally cleared me to leave the hospital 3 days ago. "I'm more than ready," I replied, my hand tightening around the leather portfolio in my lap. I had spent my hospitalization doing 3 things: physical therapy, reviewing documents Tom had smuggled to me, and planning. Jessica had visited exactly twice. Brief, uncomfortable appearances where she had expressed appropriate sympathy while avoiding any mention of the family estate. Our brother Ben had come more frequently, his face troubled, caught in the middle as he often had been throughout our lives. Tom Carson met us at the front door before we could ring the bell. His expression was a mixture of relief and tension as he helped me navigate the 3 steps to the porch, my cane tapping against the weathered boards. "She's inside with Robert and the new property manager," he murmured. "They're discussing renovations to the boathouse." Of course they were. Jessica had always thought the boathouse was wasted space that should be converted into a guest house she could rent out for additional income. The grand entryway of the Mitchell home fell silent as I stepped through the door. From the great room came the sound of chairs scraping against hardwood as people stood. Jessica appeared in the archway, her perfect composure slipping for just a moment before she rushed forward. "Sarah, we weren't expecting you today," she exclaimed, moving as if to embrace me before stopping short when I didn't reciprocate the gesture. "You should have called. We would have prepared your old room." "My room," I corrected quietly. "This is my house, Jess." An uncomfortable silence fell. Behind Jessica, Robert Williams, our family attorney for 30 years, appeared with a man I didn't recognize. Robert's eyes wouldn't meet mine, and I noted the slight tremble in his hands, always his tell when he was uncomfortable with a situation. "Sarah, please," Jessica sighed with practiced patience. "You've been through a terrible ordeal. You're not thinking clearly. Dad made his wishes known before he passed." "Did he?" I interrupted, moving past her toward the great room where Dad had always conducted family business. My body protested the movement, but I forced myself to walk without hesitation. "That's interesting, because I have a very different understanding of his wishes." The great room remained largely as Dad had kept it, leather furniture arranged around a massive stone fireplace, the wall of windows offering a panoramic view of the lake, his collection of antique fishing lures displayed in a glass cabinet. The only difference was the stack of architectural plans spread across the coffee table, Jessica's renovations already in motion. "Perhaps we should all sit down," Robert suggested, his discomfort palpable. Jessica took a seat in Dad's chair, a deliberate choice, while Tom helped me settle on the leather sofa. Diane positioned herself near the doorway, a witness to what was about to unfold. "Sarah," Jessica began in the condescending tone she had perfected since childhood, "I know this is difficult to accept, but Dad changed his mind about the succession plans. He came to understand that I was better positioned to manage the family holdings." She gestured to Robert. "Everything was properly documented before his passing." Robert shuffled uncomfortably. "There was a codicil to your father's will, signed 2 months before his death, that designated Jessica as the primary beneficiary and manager of the Mitchell estate." "May I see this codicil?" I asked calmly. Jessica nodded to Robert, confidence radiating from her as he retrieved a document from his briefcase and handed it to me. I scanned it briefly, noting Dad's signature at the bottom, a signature that looked slightly different from the one I knew intimately from years of working. Alongside him, "This is certainly interesting," I remarked, handing it back. "Especially considering that it contradicts the living trust Dad established 18 months ago." I opened my portfolio and removed a sealed envelope, which I passed to Robert. "This is the original trust document. You'll find it's notarized and properly executed." Robert's hands trembled more visibly as he opened the envelope and began reading. Jessica's expression faltered, uncertainty creeping in for the first time. "What is this?" she demanded. "The Mitchell Family Trust," I explained, my voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "A separate legal entity from Dad's will, established to hold and manage all family assets, including the business, this property, and his investment portfolio." Jessica's eyes narrowed. If such a trust existed, Robert would have known about it. Not necessarily, Tom spoke up from beside me. Michael specifically kept this trust separate from his regular legal affairs. As his financial advisor, I helped him establish it with a specialized estate attorney in Chicago. Robert looked up from the document, his face pale. This appears to be in order. It designates Sarah as the primary trustee with 2/3 controlling interest in all Mitchell family holdings. Jessica shot to her feet. That's impossible. Dad would never— Sit down, Jessica, I said quietly. The authority in my voice, so like our father's, stopped her mid-sentence. For perhaps the first time in our adult lives, she did as I asked. Dad created this trust after your 3rd divorce, I continued. He was concerned about your spending habits and the claims your ex-husbands had made against family assets. He wanted to ensure the business and properties remained intact for future generations. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That's absurd, Jessica sputtered, though with less conviction. My financial issues were temporary. Dad understood that. Did he? Because he told me something different when we set this up, I replied, retrieving another document from my portfolio. This is the financial analysis we conducted of the family holdings over the past 15 years. It shows consistent growth under Dad's management with my assistance. It also shows the impact of the 3 loans he gave you to cover debts. Loans that were never repaid. Jessica's face flushed. The property manager, clearly uncomfortable witnessing family dirty laundry, muttered an excuse and quickly left the room. Robert, Jessica appealed, turning to the attorney. This can't be legal. The codicil would be superseded by the trust, Robert admitted reluctantly. Assuming this trust document is authenticated, which appears likely given the thoroughness of its execution. It's authenticated, Tom confirmed. I have the certification from the bank where the original has been held in safekeeping. Sarah and I retrieved it this morning. Jessica's expression cycled rapidly through shock, disbelief, and anger before settling into something calculating. I recognized that look. It was the same one she'd worn when negotiating her divorce settlements. Sarah, she said, her tone shifting to something almost conciliatory. We're family. Surely we can work this out between us. A 50-50 split would be fair to both of us. Fair, I echoed, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Like how you waited until I was unconscious in a hospital bed to claim everything for yourself. Like how you've already started making plans to change the property Dad loved. Like how you've been visiting the hardware store daily, undermining relationships with employees who've been with our family for decades. Jessica paled. How did you— Just because I was hospitalized doesn't mean I was uninformed, I cut in. Ben has been keeping me updated. He didn't like what you were doing, Jess. He just didn't know how to stop you. Our brother Ben had always been caught between us, the peacemaker trying to balance Jessica's domineering nature with my quieter approach. He had visited me in the hospital, troubled by Jessica's swift takeover, but unsure what could be done. The trust is structured precisely as Dad wanted, I continued. You receive a 20% interest, with distributions contingent on the profitability of the business. Ben receives the same. I hold controlling interest and management authority as trustee. You've been away from the business for weeks, Jessica countered, grasping for leverage. Things have changed. I've made commitments, signed contracts. Without proper authority, Robert interjected, finding his professional footing now that the legal reality was becoming clear. Any contract signed would be subject to review by the trustee. Jessica fell silent, the implications sinking in. Everything she had done since Dad's death, every decision, every contract, every plan, could potentially be undone. What are you going to do? She finally asked, her voice smaller than I had heard it since we were children. I looked around the room where our father had taught us both about business and family, about integrity and responsibility. The anger I had carried since learning of Jessica's actions was still there. but alongside it was a clarity about what needed to happen next. "First, you're going to show me everything you've done since Dad died," I said. "Every document, every change, every decision. Tom will help me review them and determine what stands and what doesn't." Jessica nodded stiffly. "Second, you're going to move out of Dad's room and back into the guest suite until you find your own place." This had been a particularly galling discovery, that Jessica had immediately claimed our father's master bedroom. "And third," I continued, my voice softening slightly, "you're going to have a choice to make. You can fight me on this, hire lawyers, drag the family through a public battle that will hurt the business and everyone who depends on it. Or you can accept the trust as Dad intended and work with me, not for me, but with me, to honor his legacy." Jessica stared at me, truly seeing me perhaps for the first time in our adult lives, not as her little sister who had lived in her shadow, but as the woman our father had trusted with his life's work. "I need time to think," she said finally. "Take the rest of the day," I replied. "But only the day. The business needs clear leadership, and I intend to provide it starting tomorrow." As Jessica left the room, shoulders stiff with wounded pride, Robert approached me with an apologetic expression. "Sarah, I want you to know I had reservations about the codicil, the timing, the circumstances, but Jessica was so insistent and, without you here to raise concerns, we'll discuss your role in all this another time, Robert," I said firmly. "For now, I need you to prepare documentation acknowledging the trust's primacy and my position as trustee." After Robert departed, looking relieved to escape the tension, I finally allowed my body to relax into the sofa. The pain I had been ignoring rushed back, reminding me that my recovery was far from complete. "You did it," Diane said, coming to sit beside me while Tom poured drinks from Dad's bar cart. "Not yet," I replied, accepting the glass Tom handed me with a grateful smile. This was just the opening move. Jessica won't give up control without a fight, even with the trust document in play. "But you have the legal authority," Tom pointed out, settling into the chair Jessica had vacated. "Legal authority is one thing. Actually reclaiming everything she's touched in the past 2 months is another." I took a sip of the bourbon, letting its warmth spread through me. Dad built this business on relationships with employees, suppliers, customers. Jessica has had weeks to undermine those relationships. Repairing that damage will take time. "So, what's your next step?" Diane asked. I looked out at the lake, its surface golden in the late afternoon sun, the same view my father had contemplated when making difficult decisions throughout his life. "Tomorrow, I go to the store," I said. "Mitchell Hardware and Supply has been open every day since my grandfather hung its sign in 1952. The employees need to see that a Mitchell is still in charge. The right Mitchell." Tom raised his glass in a toast. "To Michael Mitchell. He knew exactly what he was doing when he created that trust." "He always did," I agreed, clinking my glass against his. Jessica never understood that about him. She saw his kindness as weakness, his thoughtfulness as indecision. She never realized that his quiet approach masked a strategic mind. A mind not unlike my own, I thought, but didn't say. Jessica had always been the loud one, the obvious leader, the self-proclaimed business mind. She had never noticed how carefully Dad had been mentoring me, sharing his knowledge of not just how to run the business, but how to preserve what made it special. As the sun began to set over Lake Michigan, casting long shadows across the great room, I felt my father's presence, more strongly than I had since before his death. The trust document had been his final lesson to both his daughters. To Jessica, that flash and force weren't substitutes for substance. To me, that I was more capable than I sometimes believed myself to be. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Jessica might accept the reality of the trust, or she might choose to fight. The business would need attention after weeks of her impulsive management. My own recovery would continue to limit my physical capabilities for months to come. But for the first time since waking up in that hospital bed, I felt the weight lifting from my shoulders. Dad had not abandoned me. He had prepared for even this unimaginable scenario, creating a safety net that had caught me when I was at my most vulnerable. The secret trust, his final gift, had changed everything. Not just the legal ownership of our family legacy, but the balance of power that had defined my relationship with Jessica since childhood. The sister who had always seen me as someone to be managed, overruled, or ignored had just discovered that I was, in fact, the one person who could determine her future. As Tom and Diane discussed logistics for the coming days, I closed my eyes for a moment, sending a silent thank you to my father. Jessica had tried to take advantage of my darkest moment to claim everything for herself. Instead, she had triggered the revelation that would redefine our family forever. The next morning dawned crisp and bright, sunlight dancing across the lake as I eased myself out of bed in my childhood room. I had insisted on staying in the family home despite Diane's concerns about my health. This was where I needed to be. Every movement still brought pain, a sharp reminder of the accident that had nearly taken my life. The doctors had warned me about pushing too hard, but some battles couldn't wait for full recovery. I dressed carefully in what Dad had always called my business armor, a well-tailored navy pantsuit that conveyed authority despite my naturally petite frame. Jessica's door remained firmly shut as I made my way downstairs. After yesterday's confrontation, she had retreated to the guest suite without further argument, though I had heard her on the phone late into the night, her voice rising and falling in urgent conversation. She was planning something, Jessica. Always was. Tom arrived at 7:30, carrying a cardboard tray with coffee and a folder tucked under his arm. "You look better," he observed, handing me a cup. "More like yourself." "Amazing what reclaiming your birthright can do for your complexion," I replied with a wry smile, leading him into the kitchen. The heart of the Mitchell home remained unchanged. The same worn oak table where our family had shared meals for decades. The collection of mismatched mugs hanging from hooks beneath the cabinets. Dad's ancient percolator still in its place of honor on the counter. "I pulled the store's financial reports from the past 6 weeks," Tom said, spreading papers across the table. "Jessica's been busy." I scanned the documents, my stomach tightening. She had slashed inventory orders from our longtime suppliers, reduced staff hours for our most experienced employees, and initiated a modernization campaign that seemed designed to erase Dad's influence from the business he had built. "She's been systematically dismantling everything Dad valued," I murmured, tracing a finger across a particularly troubling sales projection. "These numbers don't make sense. Mitchell's has always focused on quality hardware and exceptional service. She's trying to turn it into a discount outlet." "Increased volume, decreased margin," Tom confirmed. "She brought in a consultant from her last corporate job to streamline operations." The familiar anger rose again, but I pushed it aside. Emotion wouldn't fix what Jessica had broken. "What about the staff? Who's still there?" "Most of the old-timers, though they're unhappy. Frank Marshall threatened to quit when she cut his hours. She's hired 4 new people, all with minimal experience but at lower wages." Frank had been Dad's right hand for 30 years. The thought of him being sidelined made my blood boil. "We're going to the store today," I decided, gathering the reports. "I need to see the situation for myself." As Tom drove us the 3 miles from the lakeside property into town, I watched the familiar landscape of my childhood roll by. Lakeside had changed little over the years. The same Victorian storefronts lining Main Street, the town square with its gazebo where summer concerts were still held, the old fishing pier extending into the harbor. The constants of small-town life had always been a comfort. Mitchell Hardware and Supply occupied a prime corner location 2 blocks from the town square. The red brick building with its distinctive green awnings had been a fixture in Lakeside since my grandfather's time. As we approached, I noticed the first visible change, a banner hanging across the front. Mitchell's, under new management, grand reopening sale. Subtle, Tom muttered as he helped me from the car. I gripped my cane tighter, squaring my shoulders before pushing through the front door. The familiar bell jingled above, but the interior stopped me in my tracks. The carefully organized displays that Dad had refined over decades were gone, replaced by garish sale signs and jumbled merchandise. The rich smell of wood and metal that had permeated the store my entire life was masked by some artificial pine scent. Behind the main counter, a young man I didn't recognize looked up with a practiced smile that faltered when he saw me. "Welcome. To Mitchell's— Ms. Mitchell, I didn't—" He fumbled for words. "Is Frank here?" I asked, not bothering with pleasantries. "In the back storage area. Should I—" I was already moving, navigating around unfamiliar display configurations toward the swinging door that led to the stockroom. The young man hurried from behind the counter, clearly uncertain whether to stop me. The stockroom, at least, remained largely unchanged, shelves still organized with Dad's meticulous system, tools in their proper places. Frank Marshall stood at the inventory computer, a deep frown creasing his weathered face as he typed. He looked up at the sound of the door, and for a moment, pure shock registered in his expression before breaking into a genuine smile. "Sarah, Mitchell, about damn time," he said, abandoning the computer to embrace me gently. "Word around town is you were on death's door." "The rumors of my demise were greatly exaggerated," I replied, returning his hug before pulling back to study him. The past 2 months had added new lines around his eyes. "How bad is it, Frank?" He glanced toward the door to ensure we weren't overheard. "Your sister's dismantling everything your daddy built, piece by piece. New inventory system nobody understands. Cut orders from Henley's Lumber even though they've been our supplier for 40 years. Brought in cheap tools that'll break after 3 uses." He lowered his voice further. "And she's put the old Millerson property up for sale." That hit like a physical blow. The Millerson property was 50 acres of prime lakefront land that Dad had purchased 15 years ago as an investment. He had always intended it for future expansion of the Mitchell holdings, possibly a small lumber mill or a high-end custom furniture workshop that would complement the hardware business. "She can't sell that property. It's part of the trust," I said. "She's got a buyer lined up, some developer from Chicago looking to build condos." Frank's disgust was evident. "Closing set for next week." I exchanged a look with Tom, who immediately pulled out his phone and stepped away to make calls. We needed to stop that sale immediately. "Who else from the old crew is still here?" I asked. "Margaret's at the paint counter. Davy and Jim are doing deliveries. What deliveries we still have? She cut our service area to save on fuel costs." Frank shook his head. "Half our longtime customers are going to Jensen's Hardware over in Grand Haven now. They deliver." "And the new employees?" "Kids, mostly. No experience. She's got them working registers and sales floor. Pays them minimum wage, schedules them for just under the hours that would require benefits. Classic Jessica. Maximizing profit at the expense of everything else." "Frank, I need you to gather everyone who's working today in the training room." "In 15 minutes, I said. "We're making some changes." He nodded, a hint of his old energy returning. About time somebody did. When I emerged from the stockroom, I found Jessica had arrived. She stood near the front counter in crisp business attire, engaged in tense conversation with Tom. Her expression when she saw me was a careful mask of neutrality. "You should have told me you were coming to the store today," she said by way of greeting. "I would have given you a proper tour of the improvements." "Improvements," I repeated, looking pointedly at a display of cheap imported tools where Dad's carefully curated American-made selections had once been showcased. "Is that what we're calling this?" Jessica's smile tightened. "The business needed modernizing. Dad's approach was outdated. Our margins have increased 15% already. And customer satisfaction? Employee morale? Community relationships? Those are secondary concerns to profitability, she replied with the confidence of someone reciting business school doctrine without understanding its real-world application. Not in this business they aren't, I countered. Mitchell's has thrived for 3 generations because of those supposedly secondary concerns. Before Jessica could respond, Tom rejoined us. I've contacted Robert. He's preparing an injunction on the Millerson property sale. As trustee, Sarah has final approval on any real estate transactions involving trust assets. Jessica's composure slipped momentarily. The Millerson deal is set to close next week. We have contracts signed. Contracts you had no authority to execute, I reminded her. The developer will need to be informed. You have no idea how hard I worked to make that deal happen, Jessica hissed, her professional demeanor cracking. Millerson has been sitting empty for years, generating tax liability with no return. I found a use for it that will bring millions into the business. Dad had plans for that property, I said. Plans that aligned with his vision for the company's future, not quick profit schemes that would turn Lakeside into another overbuilt tourist trap. Jessica stepped closer, lowering her voice. You've been unconscious while I've been here actually running things. You have no idea what this business needs. I'm about to find out, I replied calmly. I've called a staff meeting. I suggest you join us. The training room was Mitchell Hardware's largest non-retail space, a converted storage area where Dad had hosted employee gatherings, community workshops, and the occasional town meeting. The walls were lined with photographs chronicling the store's history from my grandfather's grand opening through decades of community involvement. Jessica hadn't gotten around to removing those yet, at least. 15 employees, a mixture of familiar faces and new hires, filed in, confusion evident as they took seats around the large central table. Frank positioned himself by the door, arms crossed in a protective stance. Jessica entered last, selecting a chair at the far end of the table with deliberate casualness. I remained standing, drawing strength from Dad's presence in the photos surrounding us. For those who don't know me, I'm Sarah Mitchell. Until 6 weeks ago, I worked alongside my father in this business for nearly a decade. I rested my hands on the table to hide their slight trembling, a lingering effect of my injuries. Many of you attended my father's funeral. Some of you visited me in the hospital afterward. I'm grateful for both. I let my gaze travel around the room, connecting with each person before continuing. During my recovery, changes have been made to Mitchell Hardware and Supply that do not align with my father's vision or values. As of yesterday, I have assumed control as trustee of the Mitchell Family Trust, which holds ownership of this business and all associated properties. Murmurs spread through the room. From the corner of my eye, I saw Jessica shift uncomfortably. I understand you've all been operating under different management directives recently. T? Today marks another change. I straightened to my full height, channeling every ounce of Dad's quiet authority. Mitchell Hardware is returning to the principles that have sustained it for 70 years. Quality merchandise, fair pricing, exceptional customer service, and commitment to this community. Relief visibly washed over the longtime employees. The newer faces looked uncertain, glancing between Jessica and me. Some immediate changes. First, we're resuming full delivery services to our traditional coverage area. Davey, I want you to contact the customers we've lost in the past month and let them know personally that we're ready to serve them again. Davey, our longtime delivery manager, nodded enthusiastically. Second, Frank will resume his position as general manager with full authority over daily operations. Margaret will oversee inventory restoration. We're bringing back the product. Lines our customers have always counted on. Margaret, who had run the paint department for 20 years, smiled for what looked like the first time in weeks. Third, I continued, employee hours will be restored to previous levels, with appropriate Benefits. This store has never treated its people as disposable, and it never will while I'm in charge. One of the new employees, a young woman barely out of her teens, raised her hand tentatively. What about us? The new hires? I offered her a reassuring smile. Everyone who wants to be part of Mitchell Hardware under these principles is welcome. We're not letting anyone go. We're restoring what made this place special. Jessica finally spoke up, her voice cutting through the room's improved mood. These changes will significantly impact our profit margins. The adjustments I implemented were necessary to compete in today's market. Mitchell's has never competed on price alone, I replied evenly. We compete on relationships, expertise, and trust. That's what built this business, and that's what will sustain it. That's an outdated business model, Jessica insisted. The numbers don't support it. Actually, they do, Tom interjected, opening his laptop to display a spreadsheet. I've analyzed the store's performance over the past 15 years. The profit margins under Michael's traditional approach were consistently strong and growing. The recent changes show a short-term spike in margin percentage, but a concerning drop in customer retention and repeat business. Jessica glared at him. Who exactly are you to make these assessments? You're Sarah's friend, not a business analyst. I'm a financial advisor who helped your father structure his business holdings for maximum long-term stability, Tom replied coolly. And the numbers speak for themselves. I turned back to the staff. We have work to do to restore Mitchell Hardware to what it should be. I'm asking for your patience and commitment as we make these transitions. As the meeting dispersed, the energy in the room had transformed. The longtime employees clustered around me, offering support and updates on specific areas that needed attention. The newer staff hung back, still uncertain where they fit in this shifting landscape. Jessica remained seated, watching the interactions with narrowed eyes. When the room had cleared except for Tom and me, she finally spoke again. You're making a mistake. The business world has changed since Dad started this place. Sentiment doesn't pay the bills. No, but customer loyalty and community reputation create sustainable revenue that outlasts discount strategies and cost-cutting, I countered, lowering myself into a chair as the morning's exertions caught up with my still-recovering body. Dad understood that balance. You never did. You think you know everything about this business because you played shopkeeper with Dad for a few years? Jessica said dismissively. I have an MBA and 15 years of corporate experience. And yet Dad chose me as trustee. The simple truth hung between us. Jessica stood abruptly. This isn't over, Sarah. The trust document gives you temporary authority. But there are ways to challenge trustee decisions. If you drive this business into the ground with outdated practices, I'll have grounds to petition for removal. You're welcome to try, I replied calmly. In the meantime, I suggest you focus your energy on helping restore what your improvements have damaged, rather than plotting how to regain control. After Jessica stormed out, Tom helped me up from the chair. You know she's already calling lawyers, right? Jessica never backs down when her ego is bruised. I'm counting on it, I admitted. Her predictability makes her easier to outmaneuver. By late afternoon, Mitchell Hardware was already beginning its transformation back to the store the community recognized. Frank had restored the original floor layout, Margaret was on the phone with our traditional suppliers, and Davy had returned from his first reconnection visits with 3 large orders from contractors who had taken their business elsewhere during Jessica's tenure. My body was screaming for rest by the time Tom drove me home as dusk settled over the lake. The emotional and physical toll of the day had pushed me to my limits, but a sense of accomplishment overrode the exhaustion. The house was quiet when we arrived, no sign of Jessica's vehicle in the driveway. Inside, I found a note on the kitchen counter. Staying at a friend's tonight. We need to talk tomorrow. Jay. She's regrouping, Tom observed, reading over my shoulder. Planning her counterattack. Let her plan, I said, sinking into a kitchen chair. We have work of our own to do. Tom pulled out his laptop. I've been reviewing the papers you asked for, the store's financials, the property holdings, and the investment portfolio. There's something strange in the transactions from right after your accident. He turned the screen toward me, pointing to a series of wire transfers. These movements don't make sense for normal business operations. Large sums going into and out of accounts over just a few days, then everything settling back to normal, but with slightly less total value. I studied the numbers, a chill running through me as I recognized the pattern. She was trying to hide something, moving money around to mask withdrawals. That's my guess, Tom agreed. And look at the dates. These transactions happened while you were still in critical condition, before the will was even officially executed. The realization hit me like a physical blow. She didn't wait for the legal processes. She started moving assets immediately after Dad died, gambling that I wouldn't survive or would be incapacitated long enough for her to establish control. The total discrepancy is about $450,000, Tom calculated. Not enough to cripple the business, but certainly not pocket change. Where did it go? I asked, the betrayal cutting deeper than I had anticipated. Tom's expression was grim. That's what we need to find out. If she diverted company funds for personal use before having any legal authority, that's not just unethical, it's criminal, I finished quietly. The discovery cast Jessica's actions in an even darker light. This wasn't just an opportunistic sister taking advantage of my absence to claim her share of the inheritance. This was calculated theft, initiated while I was fighting for my life in a hospital bed. Don't confront her with this yet, Tom advised. We need more information, bank records, transfer authorizations, documentation of where the money ended up. I nodded, too drained to argue. Have Robert look into it quietly. If Jessica committed fraud, I need to know exactly what we're dealing with before deciding how to handle it. After Tom left, I moved to Dad's study, now my study, and lowered myself into the worn leather chair behind the desk. The room remained exactly as he had left it, from the fishing trophies on the walls to the row of leather-bound ledgers from the store's early days. Jessica hadn't gotten around to claiming this space yet, perhaps finding its deeply personal nature too intimidating. I ran my hand across the smooth desktop, feeling closer to Dad than I had since before his death. The trust document had been his final act of faith in me, his recognition that beneath my quieter demeanor lay a strength equal to the challenges of preserving his legacy. I won't let you down, I whispered to the empty room. My phone buzzed, with a text from Ben. Heard you made waves at the store today. Jessica called me ranting. Dinner tomorrow to fill me in? I smiled slightly. My brother had been conspicuously absent today, avoiding the direct confrontation as he typically did. But his message suggested he was ready to engage now that the initial battle had been fought. Dinner tomorrow, I confirmed. There's a lot you need to know. Setting the phone aside, I pulled open the desk drawer where Dad had always kept his most important papers. Inside, I found a sealed envelope with my name written in his familiar handwriting. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal and unfolded a single page. Sarah, it began, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've taken your rightful place at the helm. There will be storms ahead, some from outside, some from within our own family. Weather them as you've always done, with quiet strength and clear eyes. The trust gives you legal authority, but your judgment gives you the right to use it. I built this business for generations, not for quarterly reports. Remember that when the pressure comes to do otherwise. All my love, Dad. Tears blurred my vision as I carefully refolded the letter. Even now, he was guiding me, offering wisdom from beyond. The first day of reclaiming my inheritance had revealed the depth of what Jessica had tried to take from me. Not just the material assets, but the living legacy of our father's vision. The secret trust document had given me the legal leverage to begin restoring what was nearly lost. But the journey was just beginning. As night settled over the lake, I knew Jessica was somewhere out there, planning her next move. The sister who had always believed herself more deserving, more capable, more entitled to the Mitchell legacy, wasn't going to surrender control without using every weapon in her arsenal. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: Ben's ambivalent loyalty, Jessica's inevitable legal countermoves, the mysterious missing funds, and the continuing work of rebuilding what had been damaged in my absence. But tonight, sitting in Dad's chair with his final message of confidence in my hands, I felt ready for whatever came next. Jessica had stolen what should have been mine while I lay unconscious, believing herself untouchable. She was about to discover just how wrong she had been. The missing funds kept me awake long into the night. The methodical movement of money through various accounts painted a disturbing picture of Jessica's intentions during those critical days after Dad's death. By morning, I had made a decision. Before confronting my sister, I needed to understand exactly where that money had gone. I was reviewing property documents in the study when Ben arrived for our planned dinner, appearing in the doorway with the hesitant air that had characterized him since childhood. At 38, my brother remained caught between his sisters. Opposing forces, perpetually searching for middle ground that rarely existed. "You look better," he offered, leaning against the doorframe. "More like yourself." "Recovery is a work in progress," I replied, setting aside the papers. "Thanks for coming." Ben moved into the room, glancing at the family photos that lined the bookshelves. "The store looks different. Stopped by on my lunch break." Frank was practically dancing behind the counter. I smiled at the image. He's been instrumental in reversing Jessica's changes. "She's furious, you know." Ben settled into the leather chair opposite the desk. "Called me 3 times yesterday. Says you're dismantling all her improvements and driving the business toward bankruptcy." "Funny, that's exactly what she was doing with her improvements," I countered, studying my brother's face. "Where do you stand in all this, Ben?" He sighed, running a hand through his sandy hair. "I just want peace in the family, Sarah. Dad's barely cold in his grave, and you two are at war. This isn't about sibling rivalry. It's about honoring Dad's wishes and protecting the business he built." "Jessica says the same thing, just with different details," Ben pointed out. "You both claim to know what Dad really wanted." I opened my desk drawer and removed the trust document. "The difference is, I have this." Ben took the papers reluctantly, skimming the contents with a deepening frown. "She never mentioned this trust. She told me Dad had changed his will to put her in charge because he was concerned about your health." "My health was fine before the accident," I reminded him. "I worked alongside Dad every day while Jessica was busy with her corporate career in Chicago." "When did she claim he made this change?" "About a month before he died." Ben handed back the document, his expression troubled. "She said they had private conversations about the succession plan. Convenient timing," I noted. "Did you ever hear Dad mention these conversations?" Ben shook his head slowly. "No, but that doesn't mean they didn't happen. Dad kept some things private." "Ben, there's something else you should know." I pulled out the financial records Tom had identified. "We found evidence that Jessica moved approximately $450,000 from the business accounts while I was still in critical condition, before any legal authority had been established." That caught his attention. "Moved it where?" "That's what we're trying to determine." The transfers were deliberately complicated, moving through multiple accounts to obscure the final destination. Ben's loyalty to family harmony warred visibly with his innate sense of right and wrong. "That doesn't sound like normal business operations." "It's not," I confirmed gently. "It's potentially fraud." He stood abruptly, moving to the window that overlooked the lake. "What are you going to do?" "First, find where the money went. Then decide how to address it with Jessica." Ben turned back to face me, his expression pained. "She's still our sister, Sarah." "Yes, she is. And I'll handle this as family, I assured him. But I won't ignore it either. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 7, breaking the tension. Let's have dinner, I suggested, rising carefully from the desk. We can talk about something other than family drama for a while. Over Dad's favorite pot roast recipe that I'd asked Diane to help prepare, Ben gradually relaxed, sharing stories from his teaching job at the local high school. My brother had never been interested in the family business, finding his calling in the classroom instead. Dad had respected that choice, setting up Ben's portion of the trust as passive income that allowed him to pursue his passion without financial worry. The hardware store has its characters, but teenagers are a whole different adventure, Ben chuckled, finishing his tale about a particularly creative excuse for missing homework. As we moved to the living room with coffee, the front door opened, and Jessica appeared, looking momentarily surprised to find us together. Family dinner? She asked, an edge to her voice. I wasn't invited. Impromptu plan, I replied evenly. You're welcome to join us for coffee. Jessica hesitated, then nodded stiffly, following us into the living room. The 3 Mitchell siblings together again, though the easy camaraderie of childhood was long gone. I heard you visited the store, Jessica said, accepting a cup from Ben. Quite the dramatic overhaul you've initiated. Restoration, not overhaul, I corrected. I'm bringing it back to what it was meant to be. What it was is precisely the problem, Jessica countered. Dad's approach was charming but outdated. The market has changed. The market for quality hardware and genuine customer service hasn't disappeared, I replied. Our longtime customers are already returning now that they know we're back to our standards. Jessica's cup clinked against its saucer with more force than necessary. Those standards delivered predictable but limited growth. My approach would have expanded the business beyond this sleepy little town and lost everything that made Mitchell special in the process, I noted. Ben cleared his throat. Maybe there's middle ground here? Some kind of compromise between tradition and new ideas? The trust document doesn't require compromise, Jessica said sharply. It gives Sarah unilateral control, which she's exercising with gleeful disregard for modern business practices. The trust gives me responsibility, not just control, I corrected. A responsibility to honor Dad's vision. His vision was from another era, Jessica insisted. The business world has evolved. Perhaps not everything needs to evolve, I suggested. Some values, quality, integrity, community, remain constant regardless of market trends. Jessica set down her coffee cup and fixed me with a penetrating stare. I've retained counsel to examine the trust's validity. A document created without proper legal representation, kept secret from family members, executed under questionable circumstances. There are grounds for challenge. So there it was, her countermove, right on schedule. Challenge all you want, I replied calmly. The trust was properly established, witnessed, and notarized. Dad was of sound mind when he created it. That's for a court to decide, Jessica said with cold confidence. In the meantime, I've also filed for an emergency injunction to prevent further changes to the business operations pending legal resolution. Ben's dismayed gaze bounced between us. Can't we resolve this within the family? Legal battles will drain the very business you're both claiming to protect. I'm protecting it from Sarah's regressive management, Jessica insisted. Her sentimentality will destroy everything Dad built. What Dad built was a business founded on those very values you're dismissing, I reminded her. And speaking of protection, perhaps we should discuss the $450,000 that disappeared from the company accounts while I was in the hospital. Jessica's expression flickered briefly before settling into practiced innocence. I have no idea what you're talking about. The series of transfers initiated 3 days after Dad's funeral, while I was still in critical condition, I elaborated. Money moved through 6 different accounts before vanishing from the company's holdings altogether. Ben looked between us, his expression stricken. Jessica? Business operations require fund transfers, she deflected. You're misinterpreting normal financial management. Then you won't mind providing documentation explaining the business purpose of those specific transfers, I suggested. I'm sure your attorney would advise transparency if there's nothing to hide. Her eyes narrowed. Fractionally, all financial decisions made during my interim management are fully documented. If you have concerns about specific transactions, have your counsel submit a formal request to mine. The practiced response told me everything. She had anticipated this discovery and prepared her defense. I intend to, I assured her, along with a forensic accounting of all transactions during your unauthorized control period. Jessica stood, smoothing her skirt with deliberate precision. This conversation is becoming unproductive. Ben, a word before I go? Privately? Ben hesitated, glancing at me apologetically before following Jessica into the hallway. Their hushed voices carried just enough for me to catch fragments, taking advantage of your loyalty, and needs to consider what's best. Jessica's persuasive tone working on our perpetually conflicted brother. When Ben returned, his expression was troubled. She says you're letting personal resentment cloud your business judgment, that the trust gives you too much power without proper oversight. And what do you think, Ben? I asked quietly. He sank back into his chair, suddenly looking exhausted. I think I hate being in the middle. I think Dad would be heartbroken to see his children fighting over his legacy. And I think... He paused, gathering his thoughts. I think Jessica has always believed she deserves to be in charge, regardless of Dad's wishes. It was the most direct criticism of Jessica I'd ever heard from Ben. A small but significant shift in the family dynamics. The trust includes provisions for your input, I reminded him. You have a voice in major decisions, even though you've always preferred to remain on the periphery of the business. I know, he acknowledged. Maybe it's time I used that voice more actively. After Ben left, I called Tom to update him on Jessica's legal maneuvers. His response was immediate and practical. We need to secure all the business documentation immediately, he advised. If she's filing for injunctions, her next move might be to try accessing records that could be damaging to her position. I'll head to the store first thing tomorrow, I promised. What about the missing funds? Robert's working on it. He's requested records from the banks involved in those transfers. It's going to take time to follow the money trail, but we'll find where it ended up. Sleep eluded me again that night. Jessica's confidence in her legal challenge suggested she believed she had leverage I didn't yet understand. Something beyond the missing funds, beyond her attempted takeover of the business. By morning, I had resolved to accelerate my plan to consolidate control of the Mitchell holdings. After a quick breakfast, I headed to the store earlier than usual, arriving before the regular opening hours. Frank was already there, going through inventory lists with Margaret. You're an early bird today, Frank observed, concern crossing his face. Everything all right? Jessica's filed legal challenges to the trust, I explained. I need to secure all the business records before things escalate further. Frank's expression hardened. The office safe contains the original deed to the building, the insurance policies, and the historical financial records. Your father always kept duplicates of the most important documents in the fireproof cabinet in the back storage room. She doesn't have access to either, does she? Not without the combinations, Frank assured me. Only your father and I had those. I never shared them with Jessica, despite her demands. Relief washed through me. Thank you, Frank. Your loyalty to Dad means more than you know. It isn't just loyalty to Michael, he said gruffly. It's about doing what's right. This business is more than a profit center. It's part of the community's backbone. Your sister never understood that. We spent the next hour gathering and organizing the critical documents. As we worked, Frank hesitated before pulling a worn leather ledger from the back of the safe. Your father started keeping this the day he took over from your grandfather, he explained. It's not just accounts. It's his observations, decisions, plans for the future. The last entries were made just before he got sick. I accepted the journal with reverent hands. I had no idea this existed. He was very private about it, said it helped him think through difficult choices. Frank smiled slightly. He mentioned once that he planned to give it to you when the time was right. The store had barely opened when Tom called with urgent news. Roberts made progress on the money trail. The funds were eventually consolidated and transferred to an account at First Lakeshore Bank. The account holder is an LLC called Mitchell Futures. I've never heard of it, I said, frowning. It was formed 3 months ago, Tom continued, just before your father's health began to decline. The timing sent a chill through me. Who controls the LLC? That's where it gets interesting. The registration documents list Jessica as the managing member, but they also reference a partnership agreement that includes your father as a founding partner. That doesn't make sense, I said, struggling to process this information. Dad never mentioned forming a new company with Jessica. Robert's trying to obtain the partnership agreement now. If it's legitimate, it might explain why Jessica is so confident about challenging the trust. Or it might be another fabrication, I suggested, like the codicil to Dad's will that she presented initially. Either way, we need to see those documents, Tom agreed. And we need to move quickly. Jessica's attorney filed the injunction petition this morning. There's a hearing scheduled for Monday. That gave us just 3 days to prepare our response. 3 days to uncover whatever Jessica was hiding about Mitchell Futures and the missing funds. I was reviewing the store's quarterly projections when Margaret appeared at my office door, her expression uneasy. Sarah, Jessica's here with 2 men in suits. They're asking to inspect the business records. I rose from the desk, steadying myself on the edge. Tell them I'll be right out. In the main store area, Jessica stood with 2 professionally dressed men. One I recognized as her attorney, James Porter, from one of Chicago's prestigious law firms. The other was a stranger carrying a briefcase. Sarah, Jessica acknowledged with forced politeness. This is James Porter, my attorney, and Edwin Ramirez, a court-appointed auditor. We're here to conduct a preliminary examination of the business records as part of our petition for injunctive relief. I wasn't notified of any court order authorizing an audit, I replied, matching her professional tone. Porter stepped forward, extending a document. This is a notice of examination related to the emergency petition. As interim manager prior to the trust revelation, Ms. Mitchell has concerns about the business's current direction that necessitate immediate review. I accepted the paper, scanning its contents. The language was dense legal jargon, but the intent was clear. Jessica was attempting to establish evidence that my management changes were potentially harmful to the business before Monday's hearing. This notice doesn't authorize access to confidential business records, I observed. It only permits a general assessment of current operations. Standard procedure in contested management transitions, Porter replied smoothly. Mr. Ramirez merely needs to verify the current business status to establish a baseline for the court. It was a fishing expedition, an attempt to gain access to information that might bolster Jessica's position or uncover weaknesses in mine. But refusing outright would appear obstructionist, potentially damaging our position with the judge. You're welcome to observe the current operations, I conceded carefully. Mr. Ramirez may speak with department managers about our recent restoration of traditional business practices and customer service standards. However, access to confidential financial records and historical documentation requires proper court authorization, which this notice does not provide. Porter's expression tightened slightly. Ms. Mitchell, obstructing a court-appointed auditor could be viewed unfavorably by the judge. Defining the appropriate scope of examination isn't obstruction, I countered. It's good governance. If you'd like expanded access, please secure the proper authorization. Jessica stepped closer, lowering her voice. You're only delaying the inevitable, Sarah. The court will grant full access once they understand what you're trying to hide. I'm not hiding anything, I replied calmly. Just ensuring proper procedures are followed, something you should appreciate, given your alleged concern for business protocols. For the next 2 hours, Ramirez observed the store's operations, speaking with employees and taking copious notes. I assigned Frank to accompany him, ensuring the auditor didn't stray beyond the authorized scope. Jessica and her attorney remained near the front counter, watching the process with barely concealed frustration. When they finally departed, Frank returned to my office, closing the door behind him. He asked a lot of leading questions, Frank reported, trying to get staff to say the recent changes have disrupted operations or confused customers. Nobody took the bait. Thank you for managing that, I said, relieved. Did he attempt to access any restricted areas? Tried twice to enter the records room. I reminded him of the limitations you'd explained. Frank's weathered face creased in a slight smile. He didn't much like being told no. I checked my watch. I need to meet Tom and Robert to prepare for Monday's hearing. Can you handle things? Here for the rest of the day? Been handling things here since before you were born, he reminded me with a wink. Go do what needs doing. At Robert Williams' law office in downtown Lakeside, Tom was already reviewing documents when I arrived. The small conference room was littered with papers, laptop screens glowing with spreadsheets and legal briefs. We've made progress, Robert announced, looking more energized than I'd seen him since Dad's death. His initial discomfort with the situation had transformed into professional determination. The partnership agreement for Mitchell Futures has been located. He passed me a document folder. Inside was a formal agreement dated 3 months before Dad's death, apparently establishing a new venture between him and Jessica for expansion of Mitchell family business interests beyond traditional retail operations. Is it legitimate? I asked, studying my father's signature at the bottom. Robert's expression was grave. The notarization appears proper, and the signature matches other documents your father signed during that period. However, what? I prompted when he hesitated. The timing coincides with the beginning of your father's illness, when, according to his medical records, he was already experiencing cognitive effects from the undiagnosed condition that eventually claimed his life. Tom leaned forward. Are you suggesting Michael may not have been fully competent when he signed this? It's a possibility we need to consider, Robert acknowledged. The agreement grants Jessica significant authority over this new entity and authorizes substantial capital investment from the main business, potentially explaining the transferred funds. I studied the document more carefully. This doesn't make sense. Dad never mentioned forming a new venture with Jessica. We spoke daily about business matters, especially in those final months. The agreement includes a confidentiality clause, Robert pointed out, restricting discussion to the named partners until the venture reached specific development milestones. Convenient, Tom muttered. There's more, Robert continued. We've discovered the purpose of Mitchell Futures. It appears to be a vehicle for acquiring commercial properties in downtown Lakeside, consolidating them for eventual redevelopment. I looked up sharply. What kind of redevelopment? Robert shuffled through more papers, extracting architectural renderings. A multi-use commercial complex, retail spaces, luxury condominiums, and a boutique hotel. The plans would require demolishing several historic buildings on Main Street. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Dad had always been a staunch advocate for preserving Lakeside's historic character, even serving on the town's historical preservation board for many years. The idea that he would suddenly support a development that would forever change the town's landscape was inconceivable. This couldn't have been Dad's vision, I said with absolute certainty. It contradicts everything he believed about our community. The agreement suggests the concept originated with Jessica, with your father providing the financial backing and local connections necessary for implementation. Robert explained. And the missing $450,000? I asked. Option payments on 3 properties, Tom confirmed. Non-refundable deposits to secure future purchase rights. The pieces were falling into place, a disturbing picture of Jessica's true intentions. She hadn't just been trying to modernize the hardware store. She had been positioning herself to transform Lakeside itself, using Dad's resources and reputation to further her vision of progress. We need to contact the property owners who received these option payments, I decided. And we need to understand exactly what commitments have been made in Dad's name. There's a challenge there, Robert warned. If your father signed this agreement while competent, and if the funds were transferred according to its terms, Jessica's actions might be legally defensible, even if they contradict what you believe your father would have wanted. Then we need to determine his mental state when this was signed, I insisted. His doctors, his daily interactions during that period, anything that might indicate whether he fully understood what he was agreeing to. I've already requested his medical records, Robert assured me. But establishing diminished capacity retroactively is difficult without clear documentation at the time of signing. As we continued strategizing for Monday's hearing, the full magnitude of Jessica's plan became increasingly clear. The hardware store had never been her primary interest. It was merely the funding source for a much larger ambition, remaking Lakeside in her image, regardless of the community's desires or the town's historical character. The missing funds were just the beginning. If Jessica succeeded in challenging the trust and regaining control, the entire Mitchell legacy would be redirected toward her vision, a vision that would destroy everything Dad had worked to preserve. By the time our meeting concluded, the sun was setting over Lake Michigan, casting long shadows across the town Dad had loved his entire life. I stood at Robert's office window, gazing down at Main Street with its century-old storefronts, the town square where community gatherings had been held for generations, the church steeple that had been Lakeside's highest point since 1892. All of it potentially at risk because of my sister's ambition and my own inability to prevent her machinations, while I lay unconscious in a hospital bed. We'll be ready for Monday, Tom assured me, joining me at the window. Jessica isn't the only one who can come prepared. This is bigger than just our family business now, I said quietly. It's about the future of this entire town. As I left Robert's office, I noticed lights still burning in the hardware store despite the late hour. Inside, I found Frank at the old wooden counter, poring over what appeared to be architectural drawings. I thought you'd gone home hours ago, I said, surprised. He looked up, a grim expression on his weathered face. Found these in a locked drawer of Jessica's desk when we were reorganizing the office. Thought you should see them. I moved closer, recognizing the same development plans Robert had shown me earlier. But these had additional notations in Jessica's handwriting. Timeline projections, potential investors, estimates of expected returns once the outdated and inefficient downtown was revitalized. She's been planning this for over a year, Frank said quietly. Long before your father got sick. These early drafts date back to when she first started visiting more frequently, supposedly to reconnect with her hometown roots. The betrayal cut deeper than I had imagined. Jessica hadn't formulated this plan in response to Dad's illness or death. She had been laying the groundwork well in advance, ingratiating herself back into his life with an ulterior motive. Did Dad know about this? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Frank shook his head decisively. Not the Michael Mitchell I knew for 40 years. He would have shown these plans the bottom of the lake if he'd understood what she was proposing. I gathered the drawings carefully. Thank you for finding these, Frank. They might make a significant difference in Monday's hearing. Just doing what's right, he replied simply. This town meant everything to your father. Jessica wants to turn it into another soulless tourist trap like a dozen others along the lakeshore. As I drove home through the quiet streets of Lakeside, I passed the landmarks of my childhood. The ice cream parlor still operating in its original 1920s location. The neighborhood park where Dad had taught me to ride a bike. The community center, where he had volunteered countless hours helping local homeowners learn basic repairs. Jessica was waiting in the living room when I arrived, a glass of wine in hand and a calculated expression on her face. "Today's little standoff at the store was unnecessary," she said without preamble. "The auditor was just doing his job." "His job was limited to the scope authorized in your notice," I replied, setting my bag down. "You were fishing for ammunition, Jess." It was transparent. She sipped her wine deliberately. "The partnership agreement changes everything, you know. Dad and I had plans that supersede your sentimental attachment to the status quo. Plans you never mentioned to anyone until after he died," I noted. "Plans that contradict everything he ever said publicly about preserving Lakeside's character." "People evolve, Sarah. Dad finally recognized the economic realities of small-town retail in the modern era." Her tone was patronizing. "He understood that diversification and development were the only sustainable path forward." "Is that what you told him when you put these papers in front of him? After his diagnosis, when his cognitive function was already impaired?" I challenged. Jessica's expression hardened. "He was perfectly competent when we formed Mitchell Futures. The documentation proves it." "Documentation can be misleading," I replied evenly, "especially when someone is determined to create a particular narrative." She set down her wine glass with deliberate care. "You should consider settlement options before Monday's hearing. Once the judge sees the partnership agreement and understands your reckless reversal of necessary modernization efforts, your position as trustee will be in serious jeopardy." "I'll take my chances," I said calmly. "The truth has a way of emerging, Jessica, no matter how carefully you try to bury it." Her confidence wavered fractionally before she regained her composure. "You always were Dad's favorite, his little shadow, following him around the store, pretending to understand the business. But sentiment doesn't build legacies, Sarah. Vision does. Dad's vision built Mitchell Hardware into the cornerstone of this community," I reminded her. "Your vision would destroy what makes Lakeside special in pursuit of profit margins and luxury condos." Jessica stood, smoothing her clothing with the same precise movements she always made when preparing to exit a conversation she wasn't controlling. "Monday will settle this," she said with forced confidence. "I suggest you prepare yourself for disappointment." As she climbed the stairs, I remained in the living room, surrounded by the family home that had witnessed generations of Mitchell history. The confrontation had revealed something important. Beneath Jessica's confidence lay uncertainty. She was counting heavily on the partnership agreement, perhaps too heavily for someone with an unassailable position. Tomorrow would be spent gathering every possible piece of evidence about Dad's mental state during those critical months, speaking with his doctors, friends, and business associates. If there was any chance of proving he hadn't fully understood what Jessica was proposing when he signed those documents, I needed to find it before Monday's hearing. The stakes had escalated beyond inheritance and family business. Now the future of Lakeside itself hung in the balance. The weekend before, the hearing passed in a blur of activity. Tom and I divided responsibilities. He focused on the financial evidence while I pursued information about Dad's mental state during the period when the Mitchell Futures partnership was formed. Dr. Eleanor Walsh, Dad's primary physician for over 20 years, welcomed me into her office early Saturday morning. Her comfortable, book-lined space reflected her approach to medicine. Thorough, thoughtful, and deeply personal. "I've been expecting you," she said, gesturing to a chair as she retrieved a file from her desk. "When your attorney requested Michael's medical records, I assumed you'd have questions. Did you know Dad was signing major business agreements 3 months before he died?" I asked directly. Dr. Walsh's expression grew troubled. "I was not aware of specific business activities, but that timing concerns me professionally." She opened the file, turning several pages before finding what she sought. Michael's initial symptoms appeared approximately 4 months before his death, though we didn't have a definitive diagnosis until later. What symptoms? Subtle cognitive changes at first, difficulty finding words occasionally, moments of confusion about dates, slight personality shifts that might not be noticeable to anyone who didn't know him well. She looked up from the notes. I advised him to get a neurological workup after our appointment on March 15th, when these symptoms became more pronounced. I checked the date against the timeline we'd constructed. The partnership agreement with Jessica was signed on March 22nd. Dr. Walsh's eyebrows rose. A week after I specifically advised him to avoid making major decisions until we had completed testing. Would his condition have affected his ability to fully understand complex business documents? Potentially, yes. She closed the file with deliberate care. While he was still functional in familiar routines, his cognitive flexibility, the ability to process new information and understand complex consequences, was already compromised according to my observations. Would you be willing to provide an affidavit stating this for Monday's hearing? She nodded without hesitation. Medical ethics require me to provide accurate information about a patient's condition when legally requested. I can state my professional observations and concerns about Michael's cognitive status during that period. From Dr. Walsh's office, I went directly to see Pastor Jim Thornton at Lakeside Community Church. Dad had served as a church elder for decades, attending weekly meetings even during his busiest seasons. Michael missed 3 consecutive elders' meetings in March, Pastor Thornton confirmed, consulting his calendar. Highly unusual for him. When he did attend in April, several board members expressed concern to me privately. What kind of concern? I asked. He seemed confused about discussions we'd had the previous month, couldn't recall decisions the board had already made. The pastor's kind face reflected genuine sadness. At the time, we attributed it to grief over your mother's passing the year before, perhaps some depression. In hindsight, the signs of his illness were becoming evident. Did he ever mention forming a new business venture with Jessica? Pastor Thornton shook his head definitively. Quite the opposite. At our last private conversation in early April, he expressed concern about Jessica's interest in modernizing aspects of the store and the community. Michael was devoted to preserving Lakeside's character. He believed small towns lose their soul when they prioritize development over community. This aligned perfectly with the father I had known, the man who had fought against chain store developments and advocated for restoration of historic buildings rather than replacement. By Sunday afternoon, we had gathered testimonials from 12 people who had interacted regularly with Dad during his final months, all noting observable changes in his cognitive function, particularly regarding complex decision-making and consistency with his long-held values. Robert compiled these into a cohesive brief, supported by Dad's medical records and Dr. Walsh's professional assessment. The evidence painted a compelling picture of a man whose judgment was already impaired when Jessica had him sign the partnership agreement. This gives us solid grounds to challenge the Mitchell Futures Agreement, Robert explained during our final preparation meeting. While not conclusive proof of incompetence, it establishes reasonable doubt about Michael's capacity to fully understand what he was signing. What about the transferred funds? Tom asked. Even if the agreement is invalidated, the money has already been committed to those property options. If the court determines the agreement was executed when Michael lacked capacity, any transaction stemming from it can be reversed, Robert explained. Though recovering the funds might require additional legal action against the property owners who received the option payments. I studied the development plans spread across the conference table. Jessica's vision for transforming downtown Lakeside into an upscale tourist destination. The rendered images showed modern glass and steel, structures replacing the historic brick buildings that had defined our town for generations. None of this reflects what Dad wanted for Lakeside, I said quietly. Even if Jessica somehow convinced him to sign these papers, this vision contradicts everything he ever said about the town's future. The partnership agreement is Jessica's strongest claim, Robert acknowledged. If we can cast sufficient doubt on its validity tomorrow, her entire position weakens significantly. As the meeting concluded, Diane arrived to drive me home, insisting I needed rest before tomorrow's confrontation. The week since my discharge from the hospital had been a marathon of challenges, pushing my still-recovering body to its limits. "You look exhausted," she observed as we pulled away from Robert's office. "Are you sure you're up for this hearing?" "I don't have a choice," I replied. "Jessica isn't backing down, and everything Dad valued is at stake." "Just remember you're still healing," Diane cautioned. "You were in critical condition 6 weeks ago. There's no shame in pacing yourself." At home, the house was quiet. Jessica had been conspicuously absent all weekend, presumably preparing her own case with her attorney. Ben had texted that he would meet us directly at the courthouse tomorrow, still uncomfortable with taking sides but unwilling to stay away from such a pivotal moment. Sleep came fitfully, my mind reviewing arguments and counter-arguments in an endless loop. By morning, I felt more drained than rested, but determination provided energy that physical reserves couldn't supply. Tom arrived early, bringing coffee and breakfast I couldn't eat. Robert called. Jessica's attorney filed additional documents. This morning, statements from business consultants claiming your management changes have already negatively impacted the store's financial trajectory. Impossible to prove in just a few days, I countered, checking my reflection one last time. I had chosen a conservative suit in navy blue, professional but not flashy, the kind of attire Dad would have approved for important business meetings. "It's about creating doubt, not proving facts," Tom reminded me. "They're throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks." The Lakeside County Courthouse stood at the east end of Main Street, a stately brick building constructed in 1910 with classical columns flanking wide entrance stairs. As we approached, I spotted Jessica already waiting on the steps with her attorney and 2 men in business suits I didn't recognize, likely the consultants referenced in her new filings. Ben stood awkwardly to one side, caught between the opposing camps as usual. He moved quickly to join us as we approached. "You okay?" he asked quietly, concern evident in his eyes. "You look pale." "I'm fine," I assured him, though the courthouse steps had left me more winded than I wanted to admit. "Just ready for this to be resolved." Jessica nodded stiffly as we passed, her expression revealing nothing. The practiced corporate mask was firmly in place, the same one she had worn during high-stakes negotiations throughout her career. Inside, courtroom 3 was already half full. Word of the Mitchell family dispute had spread throughout Lakeside's gossip network. I recognized faces from the hardware store, the church, and various community organizations, all curious about the battle for Michael Mitchell's legacy. Judge Eleanor Martinez entered promptly at 9 a.m., her reputation for no-nonsense efficiency immediately evident as she organized the documents before her. "This is a hearing on 2 matters," she began without preamble. First, the petition for injunctive relief filed by Jessica Mitchell regarding management changes at Mitchell Hardware and Supply. Second, the counter-petition filed by Sarah Mitchell questioning the validity of the Mitchell Futures Partnership Agreement. As these matters are interrelated, we'll address them together. She turned to Jessica's attorney first. "Mr. Porter, present your case regarding the injunctive relief." Porter approached the bench with confident strides, his expensive suit and polished demeanor reflecting his corporate law background. "Your Honor, my client, Jessica Mitchell, was designated by her late father as interim manager of the family business following his death. She implemented necessary modernization efforts to ensure the business's continued viability in today's competitive retail environment." He continued outlining how Jessica's changes had been designed to improve profitability and market position, presenting charts showing projected revenue increases under her management model. The consultants were called to testify about industry standards and how Mitchell Hardware had been significantly underperforming its potential under the traditional management approach. The recently revealed trust document has allowed Sarah, Mitchell to make abrupt, destabilizing changes to established business operations. Porter concluded, "We're seeking an injunction to pause these reversals until the court can fully evaluate the competing management approaches and determine what best serves the business interests established by Michael Mitchell." Judge Martinez turned to Robert. "Your response to the petition for injunctive relief?" Robert approached with less flash but equal confidence. "Your Honor, the trust document clearly establishes Sarah Mitchell as trustee with full authority to manage the business according to Michael Mitchell's documented intentions. The changes implemented since she assumed control have been restorations of the business model that made Mitchell Hardware successful for 70 years. He presented statements from longtime employees and customers, documenting their positive response to the return to traditional values and service standards. Frank's detailed accounting showed customer returns had already increased in the days since the changes were implemented. Furthermore, Robert continued, the modernization efforts Ms. Jessica Mitchell implemented were never authorized by any legitimate governing authority. She acted unilaterally during a period when the rightful trustee was incapacitated, making changes that contradicted the established business philosophy that Michael Mitchell deliberately preserved in his trust instructions. The judge studied both presentations carefully before addressing Jessica's attorney again. "Mr. Porter, your client's position hinges significantly on the Mitchell Futures Partnership Agreement as evidence of Michael Mitchell's evolving business vision. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Porter confirmed. The agreement clearly demonstrates that Michael Mitchell recognized the need for business evolution and diversification. He specifically partnered with Jessica Mitchell to pursue these more progressive opportunities. "Then let's address the counterpetition regarding that agreement," Judge Martinez decided. Ms. Sarah Mitchell contends the partnership agreement was executed when her father lacked full capacity to understand its implications. Robert presented our case methodically, introducing Dr. Walsh's affidavit and testimony from community members who had observed changes in Dad's cognitive function. He highlighted the timing, how the agreement had been signed just 1 week after Dad's doctor had advised against making major decisions pending neurological testing. The Mitchell Futures concept represents a radical departure from Michael Mitchell's consistently expressed values and intentions, Robert emphasized. Throughout his life, he advocated for preservation of Lakeside's historical character and small-town atmosphere. The development plans created under this questionable agreement would fundamentally alter the community in ways Michael Mitchell actively opposed when fully competent. Porter countered aggressively, presenting notarized documents and witness statements from the signing, all attesting to Dad's apparent comprehension and voluntary participation. Michael Mitchell was a sophisticated businessman who understood that adaptation is necessary for survival. This partnership represented his evolution in thinking, not any cognitive impairment. As the attorneys argued back and forth, I noticed Jessica becoming increasingly tense, her normally perfect posture growing rigid when Robert presented the timeline correlating Dad's declining health with the formation of Mitchell Futures. The judge finally raised her hand to pause the arguments. "I'd like to hear directly from the principals involved. Ms. Jessica Mitchell, please approach." Jessica moved forward with practiced confidence, taking the oath with steady composure. "Ms. Mitchell, when did you first discuss the concept of Mitchell Futures with your father?" "Approximately 6 months before his death," Jessica replied smoothly. "I presented a business plan for diversification beyond retail hardware, focusing on property development to create sustainable long-term value for the family holdings." "And what was his initial response?" "A nearly imperceptible hesitation. He was cautiously interested. He had traditional perspectives on business, but recognized the potential for growth." "According to your earlier statements, you were based in Chicago during this period, correct? How frequently did you meet with your father to discuss this venture?" "I traveled to Lakeside at least twice monthly, specifically to develop the concept with him," Jessica explained. "We had regular phone conversations between visits." "Were these meetings and discussions documented?" Another slight pause. Not formally, no. They were family conversations. Yet the actual partnership agreement was fully documented, notarized, and formalized, the judge observed. Who initiated that formal process? I did, Jessica admitted. As the business concept developed, I recognized the need for proper legal structure. Did you suggest your father seek independent legal advice before signing the agreement? Jessica shifted slightly. He didn't feel that was necessary. We used the family's regular attorney to draft the paperwork. Robert Williams? The judge clarified. No, Jessica acknowledged. Mr. Williams was unavailable, so we used another firm I was familiar with from Chicago. Judge Martinez made a note before continuing. Were you aware of any changes in your father's cognitive function during this period? My father was completely coherent and competent, Jessica insisted. If there were occasional memory lapses, they were consistent with normal aging, not impairment. Were you aware that his physician had advised against making major decisions, pending neurological testing? Jessica's composure wavered visibly. I was not informed of any such medical advice. After several more pointed questions about the timing and circumstances of the agreement, the judge dismissed Jessica and called me forward. Taking the oath, I felt a strange calm descend, the certainty that comes from speaking truth without strategic calculation. Ms. Mitchell, when did you become aware of the Mitchell Futures partnership? Only after regaining consciousness following my accident, I answered. It was never mentioned during my daily interactions with my father in his final months. And you worked alongside your father regularly during this period? Every day, I confirmed. We discussed all aspects of the business, from inventory decisions to strategic planning. In your observation, did your father exhibit cognitive changes during the months preceding his death? I nodded solemnly. Yes, Your Honor. Initially, subtle, forgetting conversations we'd had the previous day, confusion about scheduling, difficulty making decisions that had previously been routine for him. The symptoms progressed gradually but noticeably. Did he ever express interest in redeveloping downtown Lakeside in the manner proposed by Mitchell Futures? Never, I said firmly. In fact, he frequently expressed the opposite view. He served on the Historical Preservation Board specifically to protect Lakeside's traditional character from developments like the one outlined in these plans. The judge reviewed the development renderings thoughtfully. And these plans were created under the Mitchell Futures partnership? Yes, though they directly contradict positions my father advocated throughout his life, I explained. Dad believed Lakeside's historical architecture and small-town atmosphere were its greatest assets, worth preserving for future generations. After a few more questions about the trust document and Dad's expressed intentions for the business, the judge dismissed me and called a 30-minute recess to review all submitted evidence. In the courthouse hallway, Ben approached, his expression troubled. Jessica never told me about any of this. The development plans, the cognitive issues, the doctor's warnings. Did she deliberately hide it, or was she in denial herself? I think it was a combination, I replied. She saw an opportunity when Dad's health began declining and convinced herself he was still capable of making these decisions because it served her purposes. Ben nodded slowly. I remember visiting in March and thinking Dad seemed off somehow. When I mentioned it to Jessica, she said he was just tired from working too much. She saw what she wanted to see, Tom suggested, joining our conversation. People often do when there's something significant at stake. When court resumed, Judge Martinez wasted no time delivering her ruling. Having reviewed all evidence and testimony, this court finds significant cause for concern regarding the circumstances under which the Mitchell Futures Partnership Agreement was executed. The medical timeline, witness testimonials, and substantial deviation from Michael Mitchell's consistently expressed values create reasonable doubt about his capacity to fully understand and consent to the agreement as presented. Jessica stiffened visibly, her attorney leaning close to whisper something in her ear. Therefore, the judge continued, I am granting a temporary stay on all activities related to Mitchell Futures pending a full competency hearing regarding Michael Mitchell's state at the time of signing. All property options and related transactions are frozen until this matter is resolved. She turned to the second issue. Regarding the petition for injunctive relief against Sarah Mitchell's management decisions, that request is denied. The trust document clearly establishes her authority as trustee, and the evidence suggests her management approach better reflects the established business philosophy maintained by Michael Mitchell throughout his leadership. Relief washed through me as the judge continued. Furthermore, this court directs that a full accounting be conducted regarding all funds transferred from Mitchell Hardware and Supply to Mitchell Futures, or any related entities during the period following Michael Mitchell's death. Any funds transferred without proper authorization must be returned to the primary business accounts within 30 days. Judge Martinez gathered her papers, signaling the conclusion of the hearing. A date for the competency hearing will be set, within 60 days. Until then, the trust provisions remain in full effect, with Sarah Mitchell maintaining trustee authority as designated. As the courtroom began to clear, Jessica remained seated, her expression unreadable. Porter continued speaking urgently to her, but she seemed barely to hear him, her gaze fixed on some middle distance. Outside on the courthouse steps, well-wishers surrounded me, Frank, Margaret, and other store employees, church members, and longtime customers expressing relief that Mitchell Hardware would continue as they had always known it. Ben navigated through the crowd to reach me. "You did it?" he said simply, squeezing my hand. "Dad would be proud." "It's not completely resolved," I reminded him. "The competency hearing could still validate the partnership agreement." "But the trust remains in force meanwhile," Tom pointed out. "And the judge clearly recognized the inconsistency between that agreement and everything your father stood for." As the crowd dispersed, I spotted Jessica exiting the courthouse alone, her attorney and consultants nowhere in sight. For a moment, our eyes met across the plaza, no triumph or defeat exchanged, just the silent acknowledgement of a battle's turning point. That evening, after the celebration dinner Tom and Diane had organized at Cedar Street Coffee Shop, I returned home to find the house quiet and dark. Jessica's car was gone from the driveway, her bedroom door standing open to reveal emptied drawers and vacant closet space. On the kitchen counter lay a handwritten note. "I'm staying at the Lakeside Inn until I find a permanent arrangement. We need to discuss settlement terms. This isn't over. J. Settlement terms." The first indication that Jessica recognized. Her position had weakened, that continued fighting might only diminish whatever she might salvage from the situation. I carried the note to Dad's study, my study now, and settled into the leather chair that still held the impression of his form. The family photographs watched from the bookshelves as I contemplated next steps. Jessica was right about one thing. This wasn't over. The coming weeks would bring the competency hearing, the financial accounting, and the resolution of the Mitchell Futures property options. But something fundamental had shifted today. The balance of power had tilted decisively, and Jessica knew it. My phone rang, displaying Tom's number. "You won't believe what I just heard," he said without preamble. "Two of the property owners who received option payments from Mitchell Futures called Robert. After hearing about the court ruling, they're offering to return the money and void the options voluntarily." "Why would they do that?" I asked, surprised. "Apparently, they were hesitant about the development concept from the beginning," Tom explained. "They only accepted the options because they believed Michael was behind the project. When they learned today that might not have been the case, they decided they'd rather return the funds than participate in something that goes against what he would have wanted." It was a powerful reminder of Dad's legacy in Lakeside, not just the business he'd built, but the relationships he'd cultivated and the respect he'd earned through decades of integrity. That would leave just one property still under option, I noted, the old Carlton building on Main Street. Robert's reaching out to the owner tomorrow, Tom confirmed. If we can void all three options, Mitchell Futures essentially becomes an empty shell, regardless of the competency hearing outcome. After ending the call, I opened Dad's journal, the leather-bound record of his business thoughts and decisions that Frank had rescued from the store safe. Turning to the final entries, from February and March, I searched for any mention of Mitchell Futures or redevelopment plans. Instead, I found something unexpected. Dad's growing concern about his own cognitive changes, noted in increasingly unsteady handwriting. Finding it harder to follow complex discussions, forgot Thursday's order schedule completely. Sarah had to remind me twice about the Wilson account. Something isn't right. And then, most revealingly, an entry dated March 18th, 4 days before he signed the partnership agreement with Jessica. Jay presented more documents today about her development concept. Couldn't follow all the details. She says it's a natural evolution of the business, but it doesn't feel right. Need to discuss with Sarah when she returns from the supplier conference. Everything feels foggy lately. Not like myself. I traced my fingers over his handwriting, heart aching at the evidence of his struggle and confusion during those final months. He had recognized something was wrong, but hadn't yet understood the severity of his condition. Most importantly, he had intended to discuss Jessica's proposal with me, something that never happened because his condition deteriorated rapidly after that entry, and he was hospitalized just 2 weeks later. This journal entry could be decisive in the competency hearing, Dad's own words documenting his confusion and his reservations about the very agreement Jessica was using to claim control. Setting the journal aside, I moved to the window overlooking the lake. The same view Dad had contemplated countless times when making difficult decisions throughout his life. The moon cast a silver path across the dark water, a reminder of constants that remained regardless of human struggles. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Negotiations with Jessica about potential settlement terms, continued restoration of proper operations at the store, and preparation for the competency hearing that would finally resolve the Mitchell Futures question. But tonight, for the first time since awakening in that hospital bed to learn my inheritance had been claimed by my sister, I felt true confidence that Dad's legacy would be preserved as he intended. Not just the business and properties, but the values and community connections he had prioritized throughout his life. Jessica had stolen my inheritance while I was fighting for my life, believing her administrative maneuvering and legal positioning would prove unassailable once executed. The trust document had given me leverage to begin reclaiming what was rightfully mine, but Dad's own written words might ultimately be the most powerful evidence of all. The meeting with Jessica took place at Neutral Ground, a private dining room at the Lakeside Inn where she had taken temporary residence. 3 days had passed since the court hearing, days filled with careful preparation and strategic planning on both sides. When I arrived, she was already seated at the polished oak table, legal documents arranged in precise stacks before her. "Thank you for coming," she said formally, as if this were a business meeting between strangers rather than a negotiation between sisters. "Your note mentioned settlement terms," I replied, taking the seat across from her. "I'm listening." Jessica pushed a folder toward me. "My proposed resolution. I've had time to reconsider certain positions in light of recent developments." Inside was a typed document outlining her terms. She would withdraw all challenges to the trust in exchange for maintaining a 25% ownership stake in Mitchell Hardware, a seat on its board of directors, and full ownership of Mitchell Futures with a buyout of the capital investment Dad had made through the business. "This isn't a settlement," I observed, closing the folder. "It's a continued attempt to secure what was never rightfully yours." "It's a compromise," Jessica countered. "One that prevents a protracted legal battle that would damage both the business and the family name." I leaned forward, meeting her gaze directly. "I found Dad's journal, Jess. His private business journal that he kept in the store safe." Something flickered in her expression. Uncertainty, perhaps concern. What journal? The one where he documented his daily business thoughts for decades, including his growing confusion in those final months and his specific concern about your development proposals. I kept my voice level, watching her reaction carefully. He wrote that he couldn't follow all the details of your plan, that it didn't feel right, and that he intended to discuss it with me when I returned from the supplier conference. The color drained slightly from Jessica's face. That's just one entry, written when he was tired. It doesn't invalidate the legally executed agreement. It's compelling evidence of his cognitive state when he signed your papers, I countered. Combined with Dr. Walsh's medical documentation and the testimony we've already gathered, it creates a powerful case for the competency hearing. Jessica's practiced corporate mask slipped, revealing a flash of the sister I had known before ambition had hardened her. You don't understand what I've invested in this, Sarah. My entire career trajectory, my professional reputation. I left my position in Chicago to focus on this development opportunity, which you initiated without proper authority, using funds that weren't yours to allocate, I reminded her. 2 of the 3 property owners have already contacted our attorney about returning the option payments and voiding those agreements. This was clearly news to her, and unwelcome at that. Her shoulders stiffened as she processed the implications. Which 2? The Hendersons and the Millers, I replied. They apparently never felt comfortable with the redevelopment concept, but agreed out of respect for Dad. Once they learned the circumstances of the agreement, they chose to withdraw. Porter said this might happen, Jessica murmured, more to herself than to me. The first indication that her attorney had warned her about weaknesses in her position. Jessica, I said, softening my tone slightly. What did you think would happen? Here? Did you actually believe Dad would have wanted Lakeside's historic downtown demolished for luxury condos? Did you think I would simply disappear from the picture after the accident? She was silent for a long moment, staring at the folder containing her proposed settlement. I thought, she began, then paused to collect herself. I believed I could create something significant here, a legacy beyond just maintaining what already existed. When Dad got sick, when you were in the accident, I saw an opportunity to implement a vision that would transform this town. Without regard for what the town actually wanted, I noted, or what Dad had spent his life building and protecting. Business requires decisive action, she said, but the conviction in her voice had dimmed. Sometimes that means making unpopular choices for long-term benefit. Whose benefit? I asked quietly. The community's? Or yours? Jessica didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice held a note of resignation I had rarely heard from my perpetually confident sister. What are your terms then? I opened my own folder, sliding a document across the table. These are non-negotiable. She scanned the paper, her expression cycling through surprise, indignation, and finally grudging consideration. My terms were simple but comprehensive. Jessica would relinquish all claims to Mitchell Hardware and the trust assets, returning every cent of the misappropriated funds. Mitchell Futures would be dissolved, with all property options formally terminated. In exchange, she would receive a one-time settlement from the trust, substantial but far less than she had hoped for, and would be released from any potential legal liability for her actions during my hospitalization. This is significantly less than I'm entitled to under Dad's original will, she protested, though with less force than I expected. The original will that was superseded by the trust, I reminded her. And these terms are considerably more generous than what you might face if we proceed to the competency hearing with Dad's journal as evidence. The unspoken implication hung between us. Proceeding with the legal battle might not just diminish her financial outcome, but could permanently damage her professional reputation if she were found to have knowingly taken advantage of our father's diminished capacity. Jessica stared out the window toward the lake, her expression unreadable. I need time to consider this. You have until tomorrow, I replied, rising from my seat. After that, We prepare for the competency hearing with all available evidence. As I reached the door, Jessica spoke again. I did care about him, you know. This wasn't just about the money or the properties. I paused, turning back to face her. I know you did, in your way. But caring about someone means respecting their values and wishes, not just seeing them as a means to your own ends. Her answer came so quietly, I almost didn't hear it. Perhaps that's why he chose you. The next morning, Robert called with news that Jessica's attorney had contacted him accepting my settlement terms with only minor modifications. They would sign the agreement that afternoon, ending the legal battle before it could escalate further. She made the rational choice, Tom observed when I told him the news, cutting her losses rather than risking everything. At the hardware store, life had settled into a renewed rhythm. Frank oversaw daily operations with his usual efficiency. Customer traffic had returned to normal levels, and the atmosphere reflected the community-centered business Dad had built. I moved through the familiar aisles, greeting longtime customers by name, just as he had done throughout my childhood. Margaret approached with a stack of paint chips in hand. The Henderson renovation project is back on now that the development threat is gone. They're ordering all their supplies through us. Said they wouldn't consider going anywhere else after what you did to protect the downtown. Small victories, accumulating day by day. Not just for the business's bottom line, but for the preservation of Lakeside's character and community. The settlement signing took place in Robert's office, a brief, businesslike affair with none of the emotion that had characterized our previous encounters. Jessica signed each document with practiced efficiency, her corporate mask firmly in place. When the final signature was complete, she rose without meeting my eyes. "We're done here," she said simply. "What will you do now?" I asked, feeling an unexpected twinge of concern for the sister who had once shared my childhood adventures on the lake. "Return to Chicago," she replied. "There are still opportunities there that align better with my professional goals." As she reached the door, she hesitated, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not quite regret, not quite acceptance, perhaps something in between. "Take care of the store," she said finally. "It matters to more people than I realized." It was as close to an acknowledgement of error as Jessica would likely ever offer. I nodded, accepting the olive branch for what it was. "I will," I promised. "It's what Dad would have wanted." After she left, Robert gathered the signed documents with evident relief. "Congratulations, Sarah. Not many people successfully reclaim what's rightfully theirs after this kind of situation." "I had help," I reminded him, "from people who cared about Dad and what he built." 3 months later, on a perfect autumn day with maple leaves turning gold along the lakeshore, we gathered for the official dedication of the Michael Mitchell Community Workshop, a new addition to the hardware store where local craftspeople could teach traditional skills to the next generation. The space had been converted from unused storage areas, fulfilling a dream Dad had often mentioned but never found time to implement. Frank cut the ribbon with evident pride, the weathered hands that had served the store for 4 decades steady as he performed this final tribute to his old friend. Community members packed the workshop, mingling with store employees and trade instructors who would offer classes in everything from basic home repairs to fine woodworking. Ben stood beside me, his arm supportive as my still-healing body tired from the day's activities. "Dad would have loved this," he said, watching a retired carpenter showing a young boy how to use a hand plane properly. "It's exactly what he envisioned," I agreed. "Keeping traditional skills alive, building community connections, creating something that will outlast all of us." From my pocket, I withdrew the small leather-bound journal, Dad's final volume of business observations and personal reflections. I had found an entry from 2 years earlier describing almost exactly the scene now unfolding before us. A community gathering space where knowledge could be shared across generations. The last. Page now held a new entry, my own contribution to the family record. Workshop opened today. The Mitchell legacy continues, not just through commerce but through community. The inheritance isn't just buildings or bank accounts. It's the values, relationships, and shared purpose that defined Dad's life. Some tried to take the material, assets, but they could never claim the true inheritance he left us, the understanding that business exists to serve people, not the other way around. As I moved through the crowded workshop, leaning less heavily on my cane than in previous months, townspeople stopped to share memories of Dad or express appreciation for maintaining Mitchell hardware as a cornerstone of the community. Each conversation reinforced that the victory hadn't been just personal, it had preserved something valuable for all of Lakeside. In the main store, I paused before the wall where Dad's portrait now hung beside my grandfather's and great-grandfather's, 3 generations of Mitchell men who had built this legacy one nail, one board, one helping hand at a time. Soon, we would add a portrait of the 4th-generation leader, the daughter who had fought to protect what they had created. The secret trust document that had left Jessica speechless in that first confrontation had been just the beginning, the legal leverage that opened the door to reclaiming what was rightfully mine. But the true power had come from the community that rallied around the values Dad had exemplified throughout his life, the employees who remained loyal to his vision, and the family legacy that proved stronger than one person's ambition. Outside the store windows, Lakeside continued its quiet, steady existence. The historic downtown intact, the community connections strengthened, the future secured not through radical redevelopment, but through thoughtful preservation and evolution. Just as Dad had always intended. The inheritance was never just about the material assets. It was about the responsibility to carry forward something meaningful, something worth fighting for even when I was at my weakest. Jessica had seen only the buildings, the business, the potential profit margins. She had missed entirely the true value of what Dad had built. That evening, as I sat in Dad's study, my study now, reviewing the day's events, I found myself smiling at the symmetry of it all. Jessica had tried to take advantage of my most vulnerable moment to claim what wasn't hers. Instead, she had triggered the revelation that would forever establish the rightful succession of the Mitchell legacy. Sometimes justice arrives in unexpected ways, through paths we never would have chosen. My accident, painful as it was, had ultimately protected Dad's vision for the future, a vision now secure in the hands of the daughter who truly understood its worth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.